Hello, everybody. I'm Darran Handshaw. I'm the author of The Engineer, the Chronicles of Actaeon story. It's a sci-fi fantasy adventure in the ruined post-apocalyptic world of Redemption, high technology world that's been destroyed. I'm going to read to you today an excerpt from my upcoming book, The Dark Heart of Redemption, which is a standalone sequel to The Engineer. So just to set it up a little bit, so The Engineer is it follows a main character named Actaeon, who is an engineer, as the title says, and he follows his different adventures and kind of how his life takes a twist and turn. So The Dark Heart of Redemption follows the adventures of him and his partner Isandra, who's a knight arbiter, as they're fighting a very large war. So just to set you up for the scene that I'm about to read, they're trying to break a siege of a place called Pyramid, which is in the center of Redemption. And Actaeon has a crazy idea to try to infiltrate the pyramid and get in from the ruins below. So we'll see how that turns out in this reading. So, and without further ado, 87 AR, the 53rd day of Rainbreak, Into the Deep, Chapter 13. Wave and Actaeon inched forward on their bellies to peer over the ledge on the north boundary that rose high above the marketplace. Below was a disaster. The open market was normally a chaotic arrangement of hastily constructed wooden stalls and many different colored tents designed to draw the eye of passing shoppers. In the best of times, they were meandering in narrow paths between the varying merchants, and depending on the time of day, progress could be quite difficult to make with so many shoppers stopping randomly to gaze at the wares. Now it looked as though one of Actaeon's granados had been set off in the midst of that chaos. Many stalls were splintered and crumpled. Untended, tents had collapsed from rains and now sat squat and waterlogged like so many flattened bugs. The fabric of other tents had blown free to become entangled in the structure of nearby stalls and torn to shreds by the wind. The occasional corpse of a hapless market dweller could be made out sprawled amidst the aisles, bloated and swollen in the sun. Runic tribals moved throughout the rubble, picking it apart in search of supplies. Actaeon had clasped his recurved bow from his back and set the scope to his eye to survey the scene below. "By the Fallen," whispered Wave, "I don't think I even have to look through your scope to see there's a lot of tribals down there." "Let us hope the wall breakers set up a nice diversion for us then," said Actaeon. Next scene. "Forward!" cried the first companion Itaric as he led the charge, Princess Isandra at his side. The line of war banners from White Rose and Lakefeed streamed into the marketplace behind them, rushing into narrow lanes between the various shop stands as they advanced. Squads routinely split off from the main onrush at intervals to search adjacent stalls in order to make sure there was no runic ambush lying in wait for them. To the west, Lord Arcady led a similar charge from the wall breakers and the Therian flashbolt marines at his back. Instead of splitting off, the marines simply fired their triple crossbows into the tents and stalls to ensure that any lurking ambushers were taken care of. At the eastern end of the marketplace, Supreme Captain Jarvel led a third charge. With him were the remaining Therian fighters and the Keeper 1st Division. The western front was met with resistance first. Panicked tribals crashed into them in an effort to flee from the marketplace. Arcady and the wall breakers efficiently cut down the unorganized fleeing enemy, and the next rush was stopped dead in their tracks by the barrage of bolts from Major Craft and her flashbolt marines. "Here comes our group," said Itaric. Isandra drew the arming sword at her hip, leaving the great sword Caliburn in its scabbard on her back. "Bring everyone to a halt. We stand our ground here." "Halt!" echoed Itaric, raising his offhand fist, even as he struck down the first of the arriving runics with his sword. Isandra skillfully swept her sword to and fro, blocking a spear thrust, killing one attacker and maiming the next. Together, the princess and the first companion made quick work of the initial tribal charge. The war banners of White Rose and Lakefeed formed a line to either side of them, shoving broken stalls out of the way to make room for the defensive formation. The tribal advance stopped short in its tracks, several paces away, kicking up a cloud of dust. At Isandra's direction, the Redelian line lunged forward as a unit, under the cover of the dust cloud. It caught the tribal line by surprise and saw most of the front line fall under warbander blades and spear points. The survivors staggered backward and tried to regroup as the Redalians continued to press their attack. Out of the corner of her eye, Assandra could see that Jarval's unit had also engaged the enemy. They are fully engaged now. You should make your move, she told Actaeon through the Thought Link artifact. Next scene. It appears as though we have our opening, said Actaeon, lowering the scope from his eye and pushing back from the ledge. Any tribals lingering around the tunnel openings directly below them had left to join the effort to stop the Allied advance. All right, let's keep in mind this is a one-way trip, said Wave as he secured the last of the 3 ropes around one of the shattered Elderstone pillars, a dozen or so paces back from the ledge. We won't be able to scale these lines again quick enough to avoid their arrows. If all goes well, we'd better not need to, right? Asked companion Wade, though he sounded unsure of himself. If we need to, then all of this is for naught, said Actaeon. He returned the bow to its clasp on the back of his jacket and fastened his halberd into place for the descent. Yanel nudged Wade. Let's go. We're going first. Us? Why? Asked Wade. Yanel shot him a critical look. Oh yes, said Wade. Of course we'll go first. He stepped in front of Actaeon and Wave. Sorry, Your Grace. Wave, we will go down first to secure the way. It's what we do. Oh, is it? Asked Wave with a smirk. Try to control your descent. I hear the ground can take the unprepared by surprise. Wade gave him a confused look in return and nodded. Good thing I came prepared then. Coronos was past both companions in a flash. The silver man whipped the rope around his waist and disappeared over the ledge without a second of hesitation. Wade blinked and peered down over the edge. Better hurry if you're gonna be first, said Trench with a lopsided grin. Yanel smiled and slid the rope around her waist to descend after the lore-sworn guardian. She took her time to carefully approach the edge and let some rope out slowly so that she was perpendicular to the wall before she started her controlled descent downward. Wade followed close behind. Wave nodded to Trench. Where next? I'll go last. Take up the rear, said the giant. And have your huge ass land on me? Asked Wave. I don't think so. Let's go, my friend. The one-eyed mercenary glanced at the keeper. Same with you, Lady Atrina. I don't need you taking half of us out if you slip with that full suit of plate. Atrina offered him a sneer. That's Knight Captain Kovalet to you, sellsword. And you'll be glad to have me at the fore with my suit of plate when we run into one of those death stalkers. Death crawlers? I'll be glad to have anything between me and one of those damn things, to be honest, said Wave. He instructed her with the rope and helped talk her over the edge. Once the keeper was over, Wave turned to his friend. I've shown you how to do this plenty of times. Aye, I'm going, said Trench, eyeing the edge mistrustfully. He wrapped one of the free ropes around his body and started on his way down, the rope straining under his weight as it drew even tauter around the Elderstone pillar. Wave saluted Actaeon and went over himself. I suppose we are the last ones, said the Prince Engineer with a grin. He looked at Harvin Jula and Hakrim before him. The bulky light lancer slung his lance across his back. He had fashioned a crude leather sling for just the occasion, and once the first rope went slack, he took it up and started his descent. The dark-skinned Therian captain approached Actaeon and placed a firm hand upon his shoulder. Listen, Prince Engineer, I don't know how this mad plan of yours will turn out, but I want you to know that you've my respect for doing this. They'll tell of us in songs for this day, whatever may become of us. Your words are appreciated, Captain, said Actaeon honestly. So long as there are songs to be sung in the future, then I believe we have done a good job here, however this may turn out. Don't be silly, said Jula. You've got to get back to your woman. We'll make it turn out just fine. He bared his white teeth and turned to slide down his rope. When Actaeon made it to the bottom, all hell had broken loose. It's ancestors' tears down here. Hurry up, Your Grace, Wade shouted. They were heavily engaged with runic tribals that had come out from the openings to the warrens to attack them. Thus far, the small squad was holding them off, but more were approaching quickly. Actaeon dropped down the last length of rope too fast and fell onto his back. Trench yanked him up and he pulled his halberd from the clasp at the back of his jacket. This way, cried the Prince Engineer. Follow me to the tunnel entrance. Actaeon started off at a run, and the others followed him with weapons drawn, Trench and Atrina taking up a rear guard. The tribals pursued them closely as they ran. I hope you know which tunnel we've got to go into, Act, shouted Wave. The mercenary aimed his heavy crossbow over one shoulder and squeezed the trigger, sending a bolt into the face of Trench's closest pursuer. Even if I fail to pick the correct one, it should be close enough to converge with the others, said Actaeon, huffing as he ran. Only a few terminate abruptly. Well, you better not pick one of those, or we're gonna terminate abruptly, said Wave as he fixed another bolt into place. I'll second that notion, said Wade. When Actaeon reached what he thought was the correct tunnel, the bottom of which was some distance above the ground, he tossed his halberd up and leapt to pull himself onto the edge. He helped Wave and Yanel climb up next, and the pair ran past him to secure the tunnel beyond. In a feat of inhuman agility, Coronos leapt clear over Actaeon's head to land behind him and quickly joined the others. Actaeon helped Wade up and then stood, retrieving his halberd. He pulled out his luminary and stuck it into the strap of his goggles, which he pulled down over his eyes. He winced at the remembrance of how Wave had lost his eye from the expelled offspring of one of the giant slugs they had battled in these very tunnels. As the others scrambled up, he pulled free a copy that he'd sketched of Manovo's map and began to follow the tunnels at a jog. The tunnel entrance was lined with vines as thick as a man's thigh that had worked their way within in search of nutrients and light. Once Actaeon had passed the end of the vines, he felt his boots sticking in a substance at the bottom of the tunnel. A foul odor rose to wrinkle his nose. Act, this isn't good, said Wave from up ahead. No, Wave, it indicates some poor fortune for us, said Actaeon with a frown. At least you'll be able to make some more granados, said Trench as he climbed into the tunnels at the rear. Better get moving, Act. They're right on our heels. Understood, Trench, the engineer called over his shoulder. He picked up the pace, Wave and Yanel leading the way before him, with the bolt of the mercenary's crossbow and the point of the companion's sword. Which way, Act? asked Wave. The light from their luminaries splayed across a T-shaped intersection in the tunnels. Straight, go straight ahead, instructed Actaeon, holding the map before his luminary with one hand and his halberd pointed forward with the other. When the tunnel next split, they went to the left at Actaeon's instruction. The floor tilted dramatically downward after they made the turn, and all of them spilled forward and slid down the incline. At the bottom of the slope, the party all slammed into one another. Luckily, all of them had the presence of mind to point their weapons to the ceiling. Even so, it was miraculous that no one had been skewered by the time Trench and Atrina slammed into the back of the party. I thought I said I didn't want your huge ass landing atop us, Trench, said Wave as he lifted himself up from the slimy muck that he had landed in face first after being struck by the others. Same thing with the plate, Atrina. Fine, said Trench, spitting some of the muck from his own mouth. Switch, we'll take point. Trench and Atrina passed the others on the sides of the tunnel corridor and led the way as the point guard. Actaeon followed closely behind them with his map. Split coming up, Act. Which way? Asked Trench. The Prince Engineer frowned and wiped some of the muck from the map with the back of his sleeve. The unfortunate action left even more muck on the map. A moment, he said as he pulled some felt cloths from his pocket and tried to wipe the vellum sheet clean. The loose lenses that had been wrapped in the cloth spilled free to scatter and disappear on the floor of the dark tunnel. We don't have a moment, Your Grace, called Captain Jula. A clash of arms sounded from the rear guard as the pursuing tribals crashed into their weapons. Left, go left, shouted Actaeon. He shouldered Trench and Atrina forward, and the party broke into a run once more, keeping several paces ahead of the tribals. Another one coming up, called Trench. Another left, and then a right, said Actaeon. That will bring us to a place where the creature before them brought the entire group to a sudden halt. Its bulk filled up most of the tunnel ahead, an identical version to the one Actaeon had encountered in the past, only bigger. A garden slug from a child's nightmare, with row upon row of curved, jagged teeth, filling a maw that dwarfed even Trench. Behind those lethal teeth were hundreds of smaller slugs, a writhing mass that Actaeon knew it could expel at a moment's notice. Snapping tendrils bristled from the monster's mouth and along the rest of its body, tiny growing versions of itself sticking out in 1,000 deadly projections. Three thick, three large stalks, as thick as a large man's thigh, extended from its body, and the ends open to reveal hundreds of tiny black eyes. One cluster looked at Trench, the other at Atrina, and the final one regarded Actaeon, unblinking. Trench reflexively swung his maul and smashed the eye stalk before him against the tunnel wall. The creature recoiled, and a shrill hiss filled the entirety of the tunnel. The open maw enlarged to an impossible size. "Back up!" shouted Actaeon. "Go right, go right!" The party backed up rapidly, crashing into their runic pursuers in the process. After a brief clash and a blur of blades from Wave and Koronos, they broke free and began to flee down the right branch of the tunnel. Behind them came a rush of air and numerous dull, slimy thumps as the contents of the nightmare creature's mouth struck their pursuers. They broke into a flat outrun down the right tunnel, with the remaining tribals chasing after them, though more to flee the now pursuing giant slug than to attack them. Actaeon noted the absence of the gentle flow of air as the creature slid into the branch of the tunnel behind them, its bulk completely filling the passage. Screams came from the rear as, one by one, the fleeing tribals began to be devoured by the pursuing monster. "Shit, it's gaining on us," yelled Wade. "It's too fast," said Atrina, breathing heavily as she ran in her armor. "Please tell me there's something ahead we could use to our advantage," said Wave. "I have no idea what lies ahead, Wave," said Actaeon. "The map only showed where the adjunct had gone, but she went left at that junction, not right." "Call a halt and I'll skewer it with the lance," suggested Hake Rim. "No, you may well collapse this entire tunnel if you use a lance," warned Actaeon. "Please don't do that," said Yanel. "Fine, then get me a wider spot," said Hake Rim. "I ain't letting that big bug eat me." Behind them came another scream, followed by yet another. Their pace was beginning to wane as they sprinted down the seemingly endless tunnel. "There is a chance that the tunnels come together as we continue on," said Actaeon. "Perhaps we can make it back to our goal via a different route." "How much of a chance?" grunted Trench. "Not a good one, I suspect," admitted Actaeon. "I've still got my Granado act," said Wave. "So do I, Wave," said Actaeon. "It is the same problem, though. The tunnels may collapse under the force of the explosion." Another blood-curdling scream ripped through the air behind them. "Options starting to look better and better," said Trench. The tunnel canted suddenly downward again, and they all tumbled forward and slid down the incline, a mess of limbs, weapons, and armor. The passageway opened up to a vast chamber, but the incline continued, and the party slid down, spreading apart until they came to a stop on a level floor near the center of the chamber. "That's more like it," said Hake Rim, his light lance crackling to life as he swung it upward along the incline, slicing several tribals to pieces. The group of remaining tribals managed to control their descent enough to steer clear of the crackling length of the light lancer's beam. They lifted their spears, and one of them shouted something in their language. Hake Rim swept the lance's beam back and forth to keep them at bay. 20, he cursed, and then shut off the lance, leaving the chamber dark, except for pools of light created by the few remaining luminaries. Actaeon thought he had seen some strange lumps on the ground out of the corner of his eye, in the bright light cast by Hake's lance. He turned in that direction and lifted the baffle that had fallen forward to cover the luminary in his goggles. The light revealed the lumps, and they looked like bodies. "Yanel, Wave, come with me," the engineer ordered. Started across the empty expanse of floor between him and the body-shaped lumps. The companion and the mercenary fell in beside him, their swords held at the ready. Actaeon knelt beside the first one. It was a runic tribal covered in ornamental tattoos and torn leather armor. When he felt at her neck, the life beat was still palpable, but just barely, and very slow. "By the fallen," said Actaeon. He lifted his head to look at the other lumps of light. The other lumps, and the light of his luminary revealed dozens of bodies, all laid out in a neatly spaced line. The terror was clear in Yanel's voice as she asked, "What is this? What's happening?" "Death crawlers," said Wave. "Death crawlers," echoed Actaeon. He tilted his head back to look at the ceiling, and his luminary shed dim light on the movement far above. Hake's light lance crackled to life again, filling the massive chamber with the smell of ozone and revealing hundreds of them far overhead. Brown and black carapaces gleaming in the light, the insectoid creatures sped at impossible speeds as they rippled across the ceiling, floating on thin legs that moved so fast they looked like fluttering hairs. At that moment, the giant slug emerged from the tunnel opening and slid down the incline into the chamber, leaving a trail of brown slime behind it. It paused and contracted before it uttered its shrill hiss once more. The slug's jagged maw opened again, and it spewed a cluster of projectiles at the group of tribals. Several of the tiny slugs struck Hake Rim, knocking him to the floor. His light lance shut off. The chamber plunged into darkness, and the screaming began. So thank you for joining me for that excerpt from The Dark Heart of Redemption. So that's my forthcoming second novel, which is a sequel again for those of you that have just joined us, to The Engineer, a Chronicles of Actaeon story. It is a standalone sequel, so if it sounds like that story might interest you more, you can start there. I do expect there's been some cover delays with my book cover, but I do expect and hope to have it out by late May or early June, especially for advanced reviewers. So stay tuned for that. And if we have any other questions from the chat, I'm happy to take them at this point. So we have a couple more minutes. Those of you that are following the QuaranCon readings, next up, I think we have fantasy author Trudy Skies reading an excerpt from one of her works. So stay tuned with that. Just give it one more minute, see if anyone has any questions. I'm watching the chat. So Crystal, hi. Jessa, hi. And Neil, thank you so much. Appreciate you guys joining me for the reading. Let's see, Neil Williamson asks, really interesting world. Could you tell us a bit more about it for those of us that haven't caught The Engineer yet? Okay, so you could see kind of here, my background, I'm in the middle of Redemption. And this is the cover from The Engineer. So you see Actaeon kind of poised at the edge of the ruins as he arrives at Pyramid, which is in the center of Redemption. I also have this hanging on the wall, the map of Redemption going on here. And you can see it's basically a big post-apocalyptic city. The pyramid's kind of close to the center. It's the neutral center of Redemption. Now, the story behind this big city of Redemption is it was an ancient city, and hundreds or thousands of years ago, everybody disappeared from it. It was a high-tech ancient city, and all of the people that were residing in it that are now referred to as the ancients are just gone, and nobody knows where they went. They disappeared without a trace. There's some clues as to what might have happened, but it's kind of left to the characters to figure out. So about 100 years ago, in the story, the portals opened up and just kind of dumped people into the world. Some of them were prisoners, and some of them were wardens to guard the prisoners. And other than that, they didn't really know anything about themselves. They had some basic knowledge, but they didn't have their memories of the past or anything like that. So they were left kind of to explore this futuristic ruined world, which had a lot of artifacts left behind, which you see some of them in the reading, like the luminaries are light sources that are powered by some unseen power. And they're left behind. They're scattered all over these ruins. The light lance is another one that you saw. And then even Koronos, who appeared in the story, and he actually leapt over Actaeon. He's actually an artifact man that they stumble across, and he's helping them in this mission. So he's part of the ancient technology that was left behind in the ruins. A lot of the story, especially in The Engineer, takes place in the pyramid here, which is the neutral center of Redemption. So There's a lot of dominions that have kind of eked out their little territories, and they defend their territories and cultures in the different places throughout Redemption. But the pyramid is held as a neutral location by the Night Arbiters, so that people can meet there and discuss politics and trade and things like that. So it's kind of like the almost the melting pot of Redemption. It is the melting pot of Redemption. So everybody comes together there to discuss things, and the bulk of the Engineer takes place there. And then the start of the Dark Heart of Redemption is them trying to liberate it, because at the end of the Engineer, which isn't really a spoiler to what happens in the Engineer, but at the end of the Engineer, there happens to be a tribal invasion where all of the pyramid is under siege. So the Dark Heart of Redemption starts out reading almost more of like a military fantasy where they're trying to break this siege in this world. So I hope, Neil, I hope that answers your question. I think maybe have time for one more question if anybody else has it. If not, I hope to have the Dark Heart of Redemption out to you mid-year this year, hopefully in time by for my birthday in June, certainly. And it's been nice reading to all of you. And thank you so much, Jessa, and everybody else for your compliments. I do appreciate it. Thank you, Neil. And thank you to Taya for running the behind the scenes technological aspect of this. Really appreciate it. Thank you for your hard work. I know you guys do a lot to bring QuaranCon together. And stay tuned for Trudy Skies. She's up next. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day. Read on and write on.